The autumn evening air felt cool against Marcus Webb's face as he walked up the stone steps of the mansion. He stopped for a moment and looked at the tall building in front of him. Warm yellow light poured out from every window. He could hear laughter and music coming from inside. Marcus looked down at his brown suit. It was clean and pressed, but it was old. He had bought it 7 years ago when he started teaching at Lincoln Elementary School. Marcus took a deep breath and knocked on the large wooden door. A man in a black suit and white gloves opened it immediately. The man looked Marcus up and down with cold eyes. "Good evening, sir. May I help you?" the man asked in a voice that suggested Marcus might be at the wrong house. "I'm Marcus Webb. Robert Harrison invited me to dinner," Marcus said quietly. The man's expression changed just a little. "Ah, yes, Mr. Webb, please come in. Mr. Harrison mentioned you might be coming." Marcus stepped into the entrance hall. His shoes made soft sounds on the marble floor. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling high above. Oil paintings in gold frames covered the walls. Marcus had grown up in a house with 3 small rooms and a leaking roof. This place felt like a different world. "Marcus, you made it." A tall man with gray hair at his temples came striding across the hall. Robert Harrison had been Marcus's roommate in college 20 years ago. Now Robert owned 3 factories and lived in this mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. "Hello, Robert. Thank you for inviting me," Marcus said as they shook hands. "I'm so glad you could come. It's been too long, my friend. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." Robert put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and guided him toward the drawing room. The drawing room was filled with people holding crystal glasses of wine and champagne. The women wore evening gowns made of silk and satin in deep colors like emerald green and ruby red. Diamonds sparkled at their throats and wrists. The men wore expensive black dinner jackets. Marcus felt like a gray mouse that had wandered into a gathering of peacocks. "Everyone, I want you to meet an old friend of mine," Robert announced. "This is Marcus Webb. We went to college together." Several people turned to look at Marcus. Their eyes took in his simple brown suit and worn shoes. Most of them smiled politely and then turned back to their conversations. "Marcus, let me introduce you to some people," Robert said, leading him around the room. "This is Harold Whitmore. He owns the Whitmore Banking Company." Harold Whitmore was a large man with a red face and a gold watch chain stretched across his round belly. He shook Marcus's hand briefly. "Pleased to meet you, Webb. What line of business are you in?" "I'm a teacher. I teach music at a public school," Marcus said. Harold's smile froze for just a second. "A teacher, how admirable." He said the word like it tasted sour in his mouth. "Robert, I need to speak with you about that investment we discussed." Harold turned away, taking Robert with him. Marcus stood alone for a moment. He picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. He didn't drink alcohol. He needed to save every penny of his small salary. "And who might you be?" A woman's voice spoke beside him. Marcus turned to see a thin woman with sharp features and diamonds dripping from her ears. "I'm Marcus Webb, ma'am." "A friend of Robert's? How interesting. And what do you do, Mr. Webb?" She looked at him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "I teach music to children." "Oh." The woman's interest died instantly in her eyes. "How nice." She spotted someone across the room and hurried away without another word. Marcus moved to the side of the room near a tall window. He stood there and watched the other guests. They talked about their businesses, their vacation homes in Newport, their trips to Europe. They spoke about money the way Marcus spoke about music, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert called out, "we have a special treat tonight. My good friend Vincent Hartley has agreed to play for us." The crowd made sounds of excitement and approval. They moved toward the far end of the drawing room where a beautiful grand piano sat near the fireplace. The piano was black and glossy. Its surface reflected the light from the chandelier like dark water. A man stood up from one of the chairs. He was about 40 years old with dark hair swept back from his forehead. He wore a perfectly tailored dinner jacket. He walked to the piano with the confidence of someone who knew everyone was watching him and enjoyed it. Vincent Hartley was famous. Marcus had read about him in the newspapers. Hartley had performed at Carnegie Hall. He had played for presidents and kings. He had studied at the finest music schools in Europe. Vincent sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. He flexed his fingers once, then placed them on the keys. The room fell completely silent. Then Vincent began to play. The music that came from the piano was extraordinary. Vincent's fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision. He was playing a piece by Chopin, one of the nocturnes. Every note was exactly right. His technique was flawless. The music rose and fell like waves on the ocean. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. He could hear the skill in Vincent's playing. The man had spent thousands of hours practicing. But something was missing. The notes were perfect, but they felt empty somehow. They were beautiful sounds, but they didn't touch the deep place in Marcus's heart where music truly lived. The piece ended. The room exploded with applause. People were actually standing up and clapping. Some of the women wiped tears from their eyes, though Marcus suspected the tears were more about the performance they thought they should be seeing, rather than what they actually felt. Magnificent, Harold Whitmore shouted. Simply magnificent. Vincent stood and bowed. He was smiling, but his eyes moved across the crowd, measuring their reactions, feeding on their praise. Vincent, you must play something else, one of the women begged. Perhaps after dinner. Vincent said smoothly. I wouldn't want the food to get cold. Everyone laughed as if he had said something incredibly clever. They moved toward the dining room, still talking about Vincent's performance. Marcus found himself seated at the long dining table between a woman who owned an art gallery and a man who never bothered to introduce himself. The meal was served on china plates so thin Marcus was afraid to put his fork down too hard. There were 7 courses. Marcus had trouble keeping track of which fork and spoon to use for which dish. The conversation at dinner centered on money, travel, and social events. The man next to Marcus talked about his new automobile. The art gallery owner discussed a painting she had just bought for $10,000. Marcus thought about his yearly salary. It was less than half that amount. And what about you, Mr. Webb? The art gallery owner finally asked him. What have you been occupying yourself with? I've been working on a new curriculum for my students, Marcus said. I'm trying to help them understand music theory in a way that makes sense to children. How practical, she said in a tone that suggested practical things bored her. Tell me, Webb, Harold Whitmore said from across the table, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Do you actually make a living as a teacher? I mean, it can't pay very well, can it? The table grew quiet. Several people looked at Marcus with curiosity. Others looked embarrassed by Harold's rudeness. I make enough to support myself, Marcus said calmly. And I have the satisfaction of helping children discover music. Yes, very noble, I'm sure, Harold said, waving his hand. But surely you must have considered a more lucrative profession. After all, they say those who can't do teach. He laughed at his own joke. A few others around the table chuckled nervously. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, but he kept his voice steady. I teach because I believe every child deserves to know the joy of music, regardless of whether their parents can afford private lessons. Hear, hear, Robert said quickly, raising his glass. Marcus was one of the most talented pianists at our college, you know. He won several competitions, really? Vincent Hartley spoke for the first time since they had sat down. He was seated at the head of the table as the guest of honor. You play piano, Mr. Webb? I used to play more when I was younger, Marcus said quietly. Oh, you must play something for us after dinner, one of the women said. We would love to hear you. Marcus saw several people exchange glances. Some of them were trying not to smile. The idea of the shabby schoolteacher playing piano after Vincent Hartley's brilliant performance seemed to amuse them. Oh, I don't think, Marcus began. Nonsense, Robert said. Marcus, you have to play. It's been years since I heard you. I insist. Yes, please do, Vincent said. There was something in his tone, a hint of condescension like a master craftsman agreeing to watch an amateur attempt his craft. I would be honored to hear you play. Perhaps after I perform my next piece you could try the piano. It's a wonderful instrument. Very forgiving, even for someone who hasn't played seriously in a while. The insult was wrapped in polite words, but everyone heard it. Several people had to cover their mouths to hide their smiles. Marcus looked at Vincent Hartley's confident face. He looked at Harold Whitmore's mocking expression. He looked at all the wealthy, privileged people around the table who had never struggled for anything in their lives. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. I would be happy to play something. After dinner, everyone returned to the drawing room. Servants brought coffee and small glasses of brandy. The mood was relaxed and pleasant. Everyone was looking forward to more entertainment. Vincent returned to the piano. This time he played a piece by Liszt, something technical and showy. His hands flew across the keys. The music was fast and loud and impressive. When he finished, the applause was even louder than before. "Bravo!" people shouted. "Encore!" Vincent stood and bowed again. Then he turned to where Marcus stood near the back of the room. "Mr. Webb, the piano is yours. Please show us what you can do." All eyes turned to Marcus. He saw amusement in many of them. They expected to be politely bored by a school teacher's clumsy playing. It would be something to laugh about later after Marcus left. Marcus walked slowly to the piano. His heart was beating fast, but his face remained calm. He had learned long ago not to show his feelings. When you grew up poor, when you worked in factories, when you taught children who mocked you for trying to bring beauty into their hard lives, you learned to keep your face quiet. He sat down at the piano bench. The seat was still warm from Vincent Hartley's body. Marcus adjusted it slightly. He placed his worn shoes on the pedals. He looked at the keys. They were ivory and ebony, smooth from years of playing. This piano probably cost more than Marcus would earn in 10 years of teaching. Behind him, he heard whispers and quiet laughter. Someone coughed. Someone else said something too soft to hear, and several people chuckled. Marcus placed his hands on the keys. His fingers were not soft like Vincent Hartley's. They were marked by years of manual labor from his time in the factories. His nails were clean but short. He wore no rings. His hands looked like the hands of a working man, not a concert pianist. "Take your time, Mr. Webb," Vincent Hartley said from somewhere behind him. "There's no pressure. Just play whatever you're comfortable with." More quiet laughter. They thought this would be amusing. They thought the poor school teacher would embarrass himself. Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about his mother, dead these 10 years, who had sacrificed everything so he could learn music. He thought about Mrs. Chen, the elderly church organist who had taught him when he had nothing to pay her with. He thought about his students, children from families as poor as his own had been, who came to his class and discovered that they could create beauty with their own hands. He thought about all the hours he had practiced alone in his tiny apartment, all the nights he had composed music that no one else would ever hear, all the dreams he had set aside so that others might have a chance at theirs. Marcus closed his eyes. His fingers touched the keys, and then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost too quiet to hear. Marcus's fingers rested on the keys as gently as butterfly wings. The room behind him grew silent as people waited to hear what this shabby schoolteacher would play. But Marcus wasn't in that drawing room anymore. His mind had traveled back through time, back to where his story truly began. He was 7 years old again, walking home from school in the small Pennsylvania coal mining town where he had been born. It was winter and snow covered everything. His shoes had holes in them. His feet were cold and wet. His stomach was empty. His father had died in the mine 2 years before, crushed by falling rocks. His mother worked 14 hours a day cleaning other people's houses. Young Marcus had taken a different way home that day. He had walked past the old stone church on Elm Street. The church was mostly empty during the week, but as Marcus passed by, he heard something that made him stop walking. Music was coming from inside the church. It wasn't the organ music they played on Sundays. This was something different. It sounded like water falling over stones. It sounded like wind moving through trees. It sounded like something beautiful that Marcus had never heard before. He pushed open the heavy church door and slipped inside. The church was cold and dim. Up near the altar, an old woman sat at an upright piano. Her back was bent with age. Her hands were twisted with arthritis, but those damaged hands were making the most beautiful sounds Marcus had ever heard. He stood in the back of the church and listened. He forgot about his cold feet. He forgot about his empty stomach. He forgot about everything except the music. The old woman finished playing and turned around. She saw the small boy standing in the shadows. "Hello, child," she said. Her voice was kind. "Did you come to hear the music?" Marcus nodded. He couldn't speak. His throat felt tight. "Would you like to come closer and see the piano?" she asked. Marcus walked slowly down the aisle. He had never been this close to a piano before. The woman patted the bench beside her. "Sit down. My name is Mrs. Chen. What's your name?" "Marcus," he whispered. "Well, Marcus, would you like to touch the piano?" Marcus reached out one small, dirty hand. His finger pressed down on one of the white keys. A single note sang out, clear and pure. Marcus felt something wake up inside his chest. It was like a door opening in a dark room. "You like that?" Mrs. Chen asked, smiling. Marcus nodded. He pressed another key, and another. Each note was a small miracle. Would you like to learn to play, Marcus? Mrs. Chen asked. I don't have any money, Marcus said. His face felt hot with shame. Did I ask for money? Mrs. Chen said. I asked if you would like to learn, and so it began. Every day after school, Marcus went to the church. Mrs. Chen taught him. She taught him how to read music. She taught him how to place his fingers. She taught him how to listen, really listen to what the music was trying to say. Marcus practiced until his fingers hurt. He practiced until Mrs. Chen had to send him home because it was getting dark. He practiced in his mind when he was lying in bed at night, too poor to afford a candle for reading. His mother noticed the change in him. He seemed happier even though they were still poor, even though they still went to bed hungry some nights. What makes you smile like that? She asked him one evening. Music, Mama, Marcus said. Mrs. Chen is teaching me to play piano. His mother looked at him for a long time. Then she hugged him tight. Good, she whispered. Everyone needs something beautiful in their life. The years passed. Marcus grew taller and stronger. His playing grew better and better. Mrs. Chen said he had a natural gift. She said she had never taught anyone who learned so quickly or who understood music so deeply. When Marcus was 16, Mrs. Chen called him to the church for a special meeting. Her hands were shaking more than usual. Her breath came in short gasps. She was getting old. Marcus, she said, I have something to tell you. I have been talking to people. There is a music school in Philadelphia, a conservatory. They give scholarships to talented students who cannot afford to pay. I sent them recordings of your playing. They want you to come for an audition. Marcus couldn't breathe. A conservatory. A real music school. It seemed impossible. I can't go, he said finally. Mama needs me. I have to work. Your mother and I have already discussed this, Mrs. Chen said firmly. She wants you to go. She insists on it. 2 months later, Marcus took a train to Philadelphia. He had never been in a city before. The building seemed impossibly tall. The streets were filled with more people than lived in his entire town. The conservatory was a beautiful building with tall windows and polished wooden floors. Marcus auditioned in a room with perfect acoustics. He played 3 pieces. When he finished, the judges were silent for a long moment. Young man, one of them finally said, we would be honored to offer you a full scholarship. Marcus had cried that night in the small boarding house where he was staying. He had cried with joy and relief and gratitude. He started at the conservatory that fall. He was 18 years old. He lived in a tiny room and ate 1 meal a day to save money, but he was learning from master teachers. He was playing on beautiful instruments. He was surrounded by music every day. He was happy. For the first time in his life, Marcus was truly happy. Then, 3 months into his first year, he received a telegram. His mother had collapsed while scrubbing floors in a rich man's house. She was in the hospital. The doctors said it was her heart. They said she had been working too hard for too many years. They said there was nothing they could do. Marcus took the train home. He sat by his mother's bed in the charity ward of the hospital. Her face was gray. Her breathing was shallow. You should be in school, she whispered. Mrs. Chen told me you're doing wonderfully. I'm where I need to be, Mama, Marcus said, holding her hand. Promise me something, his mother said. Her grip on his hand was weak. Promise me you won't give up your music. Promise me. I promise, Mama. But she knew he was lying. She knew her son. Marcus, she said, and her voice was stronger now. You listen to me. I didn't clean those houses so you could come back here and work in the mines. I didn't sacrifice so you could give up your dreams. But Mama, who will pay for the hospital? Who will pay for... He couldn't finish. Who would pay for her funeral? His mother closed her eyes. I'm so tired, baby. So tired. She died 2 days later. She was 43 years old. She had worked herself to death so her son could have a better life. Marcus left the conservatory. He never went back. He couldn't. His mother had debts. The hospital wanted money. There was the funeral to pay for. He got a job in a factory, then another job loading trucks at night. He worked 18 hours a day. He worked until he paid every debt his mother had left behind, but he kept his promise to her. He never gave up his music. In the few hours he wasn't working, he went to the church. The old piano was still there. Mrs. Chen was too sick to play anymore, but she came and sat in the pews and listened to Marcus practice. You're getting better, she would say. Even without the fancy school, you're getting better. Marcus practiced for 5 years while working his factory jobs. He practiced until his hands were calloused and his fingers were stiff from factory work. But every night, he made those damaged hands create something beautiful. Mrs. Chen died when Marcus was 25. She left him a letter. In it, she wrote, "Music is not about where you learn or who teaches you. Music is about truth. You have truth in your playing, Marcus. Don't ever lose that." Marcus kept working. He saved every penny he could. Finally, he had enough money to attend a local college part-time. It took him 6 years to finish his degree. He studied during lunch breaks. He wrote papers late at night after his factory shifts. That's where he met Robert Harrison. Robert was from a wealthy family. He was at college because it was expected of him. Marcus was there because he had fought and bled for every opportunity. They became friends anyway. Robert liked that Marcus didn't care about money or status. Marcus liked that Robert treated him like an equal, even though their lives were completely different. In their senior year, the college held a music competition. Robert convinced Marcus to enter. Marcus played a piece he had composed himself. It was about loss and struggle and the small joys that keep people going in hard times. He won first place. For a brief moment, Marcus thought maybe he could have a career in music after all. Maybe he could perform. Maybe he could compose, but reality had other plans. There were no jobs for unknown pianists from poor backgrounds. The music world was closed to people like him. He needed steady work. He needed to eat. He became a teacher. He got a job at Lincoln Elementary School in a poor part of the city. The school had one old piano with several broken keys. His students were children who came to school hungry, children whose parents worked multiple jobs, children who had never heard classical music before. Marcus taught them anyway. He taught them that music wasn't just for rich people in concert halls. He taught them that they could create beauty with their own hands. He taught them that art belonged to everyone, not just the privileged few. And at night, alone in his small apartment, Marcus composed. He wrote music about real life, music about factory workers and tired mothers and children who dreamed of better things. No one heard these compositions except him. He didn't write them for fame. He wrote them because he had to, because the music was inside him and needed to come out. He bought himself a small, upright piano. It took him 3 years to save enough money. It wasn't a grand piano like the one in Robert Harrison's drawing room, but it was his. And on that humble instrument, Marcus created some of the most honest music ever written. The years passed. Marcus kept teaching. He helped hundreds of children discover music. Some of them went on to play in orchestras. Some became music teachers themselves. Most just carried with them the knowledge that they could create something beautiful, even when life was hard. Marcus didn't mind that he wasn't famous. He didn't mind that he would never play in Carnegie Hall. He had something more valuable. He had truth. He had authenticity. He had music that came from real life, real struggle, real joy. Now, sitting at Robert Harrison's expensive piano, surrounded by wealthy people who had laughed at him, Marcus let all these memories flow through his fingers into the keys. The soft opening notes grew stronger. Marcus began to play the composition he had written 10 years ago, during the darkest time after his mother's death. The music spoke of loss, but it also spoke of survival, of continuing on even when everything seemed impossible. The conversations in the room behind him stopped. People grew quiet. They had expected to be politely bored. They had expected amateur playing, simple pieces, maybe a few mistakes that would confirm their low opinion of the school teacher. But this was something different. This was something they had never heard before. The music came from somewhere deep and true. It wasn't showing off. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply telling the truth in the language of notes and chords and melodies. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys with absolute certainty. His technique was flawless. His timing was perfect. But it was more than technical skill. There was something in his playing that made people hold their breath, something that made their hearts ache with feelings they couldn't name. Vincent Hartley had played beautifully. He had demonstrated perfect technique and masterful control, but he had been performing, showing the audience his skill. Marcus wasn't performing. He was sharing something true and painful and beautiful. He was opening his heart and letting everyone see inside. And the people in that drawing room, people who had everything money could buy, suddenly felt like they were seeing something they had never experienced before. They were hearing real music for the first time in their lives. The music continued to fill the drawing room. Marcus's hands moved across the piano keys like they were having a conversation with the instrument. His composition was telling a story without words, painting pictures with sound. The piece moved through different movements, different emotions. There were parts that sounded like early morning when the world is quiet and full of possibility. There were parts that sounded like the middle of a hard day, when your body aches and you wonder if you can keep going. There were parts that sounded like evening when you finally rest and remember why you kept trying. Behind Marcus, Harold Whitmore stood frozen with his brandy glass halfway to his lips. He had been ready to smirk at the school teachers playing, but the smirk had died on his face within the first 30 seconds. Now he stood completely still listening. Something in the music reminded him of his own father, a man who had built the Whitmore banking company from nothing, working 16-hour days until it killed him. Harold had inherited everything. He had never built anything himself. The music made him remember this, and the memory hurt. The woman who owned the art gallery had tears running down her face. She didn't understand why she was crying. She bought and sold beautiful things every day. But this music touched something in her that $10,000 paintings never had. It reminded her of when she was a young girl and wanted to be a painter herself. Before her parents convinced her that selling art was more practical than making it, Robert Harrison stood near the fireplace, watching his old friend play. He remembered Marcus from college. Back then, Marcus had been thin and tired, working 2 jobs to pay for school. Robert had tried to loan him money several times, but Marcus always refused. Robert had thought Marcus was foolish and proud. Now, listening to this music, Robert realized that Marcus had understood something important. Some things you have to earn yourself. Some struggles make you stronger instead of breaking you. Vincent Hartley had moved closer to the piano. He was standing where he could see Marcus's hands. As a professional pianist, Vincent could recognize extraordinary technique when he saw it. Marcus's fingers were doing things that took decades of practice to master. The difficult passages that would make most pianists slow down and concentrate, Marcus played with ease. His hands flowed across the keys like water finding its path, but it was more than technique that held Vincent's attention. It was the composition itself. Vincent had played thousands of pieces by hundreds of composers. He knew music theory inside and out. He could analyze any piece and tell you exactly how it was constructed. But he had never heard anything like this. The composition was complex, full of unexpected harmonies and rhythms. It broke rules that Vincent had been taught never to break. Yet somehow it worked, more than worked. It was brilliant. It was original. It was real. Vincent felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. It felt like jealousy, but it was mixed with something else. Respect, awe, and a strange kind of shame. Vincent had spent his whole life playing other people's music. He played Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin. He played them perfectly. Critics praised his interpretation, his technique, his style. He had played for presidents and kings. He was famous and wealthy, but he had never created anything. He had never composed a single piece of original music. He was an interpreter, not a creator. He was a messenger carrying other people's words, but he had no words of his own. And here was this school teacher, this man in a shabby brown suit, playing something completely original, something true and powerful and moving, something that came from his own heart and mind. The music shifted again. It grew louder and more intense. Marcus's fingers began to move faster. He was building toward something, climbing toward some peak. The notes tumbled over each other like water rushing downhill. His left hand played deep, rolling bass notes that you could feel in your chest. His right hand danced across the high keys, creating melodies that soared above everything else. A young woman near the back of the room gripped her husband's arm. She had studied piano as a girl. Her teacher had told her she had talent, but her parents had said music wasn't a suitable career for a lady. She had married well instead. Now she had everything she was supposed to want. A rich husband, a beautiful home, social position, but listening to Marcus play, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt awake. She felt alive. She remembered what it was like to love something for its own sake, not because it gave you status or security. The piece moved into a quiet section. After all the loud, intense playing, the sudden softness was like taking a breath after running. Marcus played a simple melody with his right hand. Just a few notes repeated with small changes. His left hand provided gentle accompaniment, like someone walking quietly beside you on a long journey. This section of the music felt like acceptance, like understanding that life is hard but also worth living, like recognizing that beauty exists even in difficult times. The melody was so simple a child could play it, but the way Marcus played it with perfect touch and timing made it profound. Vincent Hartley closed his eyes. He felt something breaking inside him. He had been playing piano for 35 years. He had dedicated his life to music. But had he ever played anything with this much honesty? Had he ever shared anything this real with an audience? He thought about his last concert at Carnegie Hall. He had played Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, one of the most difficult pieces ever written. The audience had given him a standing ovation. The newspapers had called his performance masterful. But he had felt nothing. He had been focused on technique, on not making mistakes, on living up to expectations. He had been so worried about being perfect that he had forgotten to feel the music. Marcus wasn't worried about being perfect. He was simply telling the truth. And the truth was more powerful than any perfect performance could ever be. The quiet section ended. Marcus began to build again, but this time it was different. This time the music was climbing towards something hopeful. The notes became brighter. The rhythms became more energetic. It sounded like morning after a long night. It sounded like spring after a hard winter. It sounded like the human spirit refusing to give up. Marcus's hands flew across the keys. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing grew deeper. He was pouring everything he had into this performance. Every sacrifice he had made. Every student he had helped. Every night he had practiced alone. Every dream he had given up and every dream he had kept. All of it flowed through his fingers into the music. The technical difficulty of what he was playing was extraordinary. There were passages that required both hands to cross over each other multiple times. There were chords that spread across more than an octave, requiring large, strong hands to play them properly. There were runs that climbed from the lowest notes to the highest and back again at incredible speed. Vincent Hartley watched with a musician's eye. He knew how hard these things were to play. He had practiced similar passages for hours every day for years. But Marcus made it look effortless. His hands seemed to know exactly where to go without conscious thought. The music built higher and higher. It was like climbing a mountain. Each new section pushed further, reached higher, demanded more. The sound filled the entire room. It seemed too big to be coming from just one instrument, just one man. Marcus's face was intense with concentration, but there was also something like joy in his expression. This was what he was made to do. This was his purpose, not performing for rich people in drawing rooms, not seeking fame or recognition, but creating truth through music and sharing it with whoever would listen. The climax came suddenly. Marcus's hands came down on the keys with tremendous force, creating a massive chord that seemed to shake the walls. Then another chord, even bigger. Then another. The music was enormous now, filling every space, demanding to be heard. And then, just as suddenly, it became soft again. The final notes were quiet and gentle. They floated in the air like feathers falling to the ground. Marcus played the last chord so softly you could barely hear it. His hands lifted from the keys. The final note sang out in the silence, then slowly faded away. Marcus sat still at the piano, his hands resting in his lap. His chest moved as he breathed deeply. His eyes were closed. For a moment, he had forgotten where he was. He had been lost in the music, in the story he was telling. The room was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. They were all caught in the spell of what they had just heard. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. It felt like the world had stopped turning. Then Vincent Hartley began to clap. He wasn't clapping politely like people do at social functions. He was clapping hard with all his strength. His face was pale. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. The sound of his applause broke the spell. Suddenly, everyone was clapping. Not just clapping. They were standing up. The whole room rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. Some people were crying openly. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Bravo!" Others took up the cry. "Bravo! Bravo!" Harold Whitmore was clapping so hard his hands hurt. His face was red. He was thinking about all the cutting remarks he had made at dinner. He felt small and ashamed. The art gallery owner couldn't stop crying. She was clapping and crying at the same time. She hadn't felt this moved since she was a child listening to her grandmother sing old folk songs in the kitchen. Robert Harrison had tears running down his face. He had known Marcus was talented in college. But this was something beyond talent. This was genius. And he had let his friend disappear from his life, assuming that Marcus's choice to teach meant he had given up on music. Robert realized now how wrong he had been. Marcus opened his eyes. He seemed surprised by the applause. He stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the room. He looked uncomfortable with all the attention. He gave a small, awkward bow. But the applause didn't stop. It went on and on. People were calling out to him, "Encore! Play something else. That was incredible." Vincent Hartley pushed through the crowd. He walked right up to Marcus. His face was serious, almost stern. For a moment, Marcus thought the famous pianist was angry with him. Then Vincent held out his hand. "Mr. Webb," he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "That was the most extraordinary piece of music I have ever heard. Who composed it?" Marcus shook Vincent's hand. "I did," he said quietly. Vincent's eyes widened. "You wrote that?" Marcus nodded. "My God," Vincent said softly. He looked at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time. Not a shabby school teacher, not someone to be condescended to, but a true artist, a real composer. "How long ago did you write it?" "About 10 years ago," Marcus said. "Have you written other pieces?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes, quite a few." "And where have they been performed?" "Nowhere. I just play them for myself. In my apartment." Vincent looked like someone had struck him. "Nowhere? But this music needs to be heard. It needs to be shared. You need to be performing. You need to be recording your work." Other people were crowding around now, all wanting to talk to Marcus. The art gallery owner grabbed his hand. "Mr. Webb, that was beautiful, truly beautiful. Where can I hear more of your music?" I don't perform publicly," Marcus said. "But you must," she insisted. "Please, you must." Harold Whitmore pushed forward. His face was still red. "Mr. Webb, I need to apologize. What I said at dinner about teaching, I was wrong. I was a fool." He looked genuinely distressed. "It's all right," Marcus said gently. "No, it's not all right," Harold said. "I judged you without knowing anything about you." "I'm sorry." A well-dressed man Marcus hadn't met earlier introduced himself. "I'm Richard Morton. I'm a music patron. I fund concerts and recitals. Mr. Webb, I would be honored to sponsor a concert series featuring your original compositions. We could book a proper concert hall. We could—" "That's very kind," Marcus interrupted. "But I'm not looking for that." Everyone started talking at once, offering suggestions, making plans. But Marcus just shook his head and smiled. They didn't understand. They thought he wanted what they wanted: fame, recognition, success in their terms. But Marcus had something more valuable. He had truth. And he knew that truth didn't need Carnegie Hall to be real. The crowd around Marcus continued to grow. Everyone wanted to talk to him. Everyone had questions. But Vincent Hartley raised his hand asking for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Vincent said. "I think Mr. Webb could use some air. Perhaps we should let him rest for a moment." The crowd reluctantly stepped back, but their eyes stayed on Marcus. They looked at him differently now. The shabby suit didn't matter anymore. The worn shoes meant nothing. They had heard what was inside him, and they knew they had been in the presence of something rare. Robert Harrison touched Marcus's arm. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Let's go to my study where you can catch your breath." Marcus nodded gratefully. Robert led him out of the drawing room and down a hall. They climbed a staircase to the second floor. Robert's study was a comfortable room with leather chairs, walls of books, and a fireplace. He poured Marcus a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. "Thank you," Marcus said, drinking the water. His throat was dry. His hands were shaking slightly. The performance had taken everything out of him. "Marcus," Robert said, sitting down across from him, "I had no idea." All these years, and I had no idea you were still playing, still composing. I thought you had given up music when you became a teacher. I never gave it up, Marcus said. I just changed how I lived with it. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you stay in touch? I could have helped you. I could have introduced you to people. I could have— Robert, you're a good friend, Marcus interrupted gently. But I didn't want that kind of help. I made my choices. I'm at peace with them. Before Robert could respond, there was a knock at the door. Vincent Hartley stood in the doorway. May I come in? He asked. Robert looked at Marcus, who nodded. Vincent entered and closed the door behind him. He took a chair near Marcus. For a long moment, he just looked at the school teacher, studying his face. How did you learn to play like that? Vincent finally asked. Marcus told him. He told the story of Mrs. Chen and the old piano in the church. He told about his mother's death and leaving the conservatory. He told about the factory jobs and the years of practicing alone. He told about becoming a teacher and composing music in his tiny apartment. Vincent listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Vincent was quiet for a while. Then he spoke, and his voice was different than before. The condescension was gone. The pride was gone. He sounded humble, almost vulnerable. Do you know what I was thinking while you played? Vincent asked. I was thinking that I have wasted my life. That's not true, Marcus said. No, listen to me, Vincent insisted. I have spent 35 years playing piano. I have studied with the greatest teachers. I have performed in the finest concert halls. I have played for audiences of thousands, and yet I have never created anything. I have never written a single original piece of music. I am an interpreter, not an artist. I am a craftsman, not a creator. Being an interpreter is important, Marcus said. The world needs people who can bring the great composers to life for new audiences. Maybe, Vincent said. But tonight I heard something that made me realize what I'm missing. You put yourself into that music. Your heart, your soul, your experiences. When I play Chopin, I play the notes that Chopin wrote. But when you play your own compositions, you play something that could only come from you. It's authentic. It's real. Vincent leaned forward in his chair. His face was intense. I want to ask you something. Would you teach me? Marcus looked surprised. Teach you what? You're already a master pianist. Your technique is flawless. Teach me what you know, Vincent said. Not technique. Not theory. I know all that. Teach me how to find what's real in music. Teach me how to play with the kind of honesty I heard tonight. I've been playing piano my whole life, but I've forgotten why I started. I need to remember. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, I'll make you a deal. I'll work with you if you'll do something for me. Anything, Vincent said. Come play for my students. Once a month. Come to Lincoln Elementary School and play for children who have never been to a concert. Show them that music isn't just for rich people. Show them that someone like you, someone famous, thinks they matter. Vincent smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine. I would be honored. They shook hands. Robert watched this exchange with wonder. He was seeing two very different men, from very different worlds, finding common ground in their love of music. There was another knock at the door. Harold Whitmore stuck his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a bit of a situation downstairs. Everyone wants to talk to Mr. Webb. A few people are getting rather insistent. Robert sighed. We'd better go back down. When they returned to the drawing room, Marcus found himself surrounded again. But this time the questions were more serious, more thoughtful. People wanted to know about his compositions. They wanted to know about his teaching. They wanted to understand how he had developed his unique voice. The art gallery owner, whose name was Margaret Sullivan, pulled Marcus aside. Mr. Webb, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have been in the art world for 20 years. I know real talent when I see it or hear it. What you played tonight was genius. It deserves to be shared with the world. Mrs. Sullivan, I appreciate that, Marcus said. But my life is my students. That's where I'm needed. What if you could do both? Margaret asked. What if you could continue teaching and also share your music more widely? Think about it. If people heard your compositions, if they knew your story, you might inspire others, other teachers, other people who gave up their dreams, other people who think they're too old or too poor or too ordinary to create something beautiful. Marcus started to shake his head, but Margaret held up her hand. Just think about it. That's all I ask. Don't give me an answer tonight. Just think about it. Richard Morton, the music patron, joined their conversation. Mrs. Sullivan is right, Mr. Webb. Your music needs to be heard. But I understand your reluctance. You've built a life that works for you. You've made peace with your choices. I respect that. But consider this. You could record your compositions. Just recordings. You wouldn't have to perform publicly if you don't want to. But the recordings could exist for anyone who wanted to hear them. Your students, for instance. Wouldn't you like them to hear what you've created? Marcus thought about his students. Sarah, who was so shy she could barely speak, but who became confident when she played piano. Miguel, who came from a home where both parents worked night shifts and who found peace in music. Little Amy, whose father was in prison and whose mother was struggling with addiction, but who lit up every time she learned a new song. What would it mean to them if they could hear their teacher's music? If they could know that their ordinary-looking teacher in his shabby suit had created something beautiful and true? I'll think about it, Marcus said finally. The evening continued. People kept approaching Marcus with offers, suggestions, ideas. Some wanted to commission new works. Some wanted to arrange concerts. Some just wanted to talk about music and hear more of his story. Marcus was polite to everyone, but he gave no firm commitments. He listened more than he spoke. He watched these wealthy, privileged people with their expensive clothes and their easy lives. They were good people, most of them. They weren't cruel or mean. They just lived in a different world than he did. As the night grew late, guests began to leave. Each one stopped to thank Marcus and to tell him how much his performance had meant to them. Harold Whitmore shook his hand and apologized again for his rudeness. Margaret Sullivan pressed her card into his hand and made him promise to call her. Richard Morton did the same. Finally, only Marcus, Robert, and Vincent remained in the drawing room. The servants had cleared away the glasses and plates. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to embers. "Marcus," Robert said, "you know you've changed everything tonight, don't you?" "I just played piano," Marcus said. "No," Vincent said firmly. "You did something much more important than that. You reminded us what music is supposed to be, not performance, not technique, not entertainment, but truth. You reminded me, at least. And I needed that reminder more than you know." Vincent stood up. He went to the piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "I have a confession to make," he said. "I haven't enjoyed playing piano in years. Every performance feels like a burden. Every concert feels like a test I might fail. I'm always worried about reviews, about what critics will say, about maintaining my reputation. I've forgotten how to simply love the music." He turned to look at Marcus. "When I watched you play tonight, you weren't worried about any of that. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just sharing something true, and it was more powerful than any performance I've ever seen, including my own." "You're too hard on yourself," Marcus said. "You have a great gift. You bring joy to thousands of people." "Maybe," Vincent said, "but I want to bring truth like you do. I want to play with that kind of honesty. That's why I really meant it when I asked you to teach me. I need to learn what you know." "What I know isn't complicated," Marcus said. "I just play what's in my heart. I write about what I know. I don't try to be clever or impressive. I just try to be honest." "See, that's exactly what I need to learn," Vincent said. "How to be honest. How to stop performing and start communicating. How to remember why I fell in love with music in the first place." Robert had been listening to this conversation quietly. Now he spoke up. "Marcus, Vincent is right. What you have is special. It's not just talent. It's perspective. It's wisdom earned through struggle. People need to hear what you have to say, both through your music and through your teaching." "I teach every day," Marcus reminded him. 30 children in my classroom. That's my audience." "What if it could be more?" Robert asked. "What if you could influence not just your students but other teachers? What if your music could inspire others to keep creating, even when the world tells them they're not good enough?" Marcus was tired. The evening had been overwhelming. He had come to his friend's house expecting to feel out of place and uncomfortable. He had been mocked and dismissed. Then he had played piano and somehow everything had changed, but he wasn't sure he wanted things to change. His life was simple. He taught his students, he played his piano, he wrote his music. It was enough, wasn't it? "I need to go home," Marcus said, standing up. "It's late. Thank you for the evening, Robert." "Let me call a car for you," Robert said. "I'll take the train. It's fine." Absolutely not, Robert insisted. My driver will take you home. It's the least I can do. Marcus was too tired to argue. He said goodnight to Vincent and Robert. Vincent reminded him of their agreement. I'll come to your school next month. We'll arrange a time. I'll hold you to that, Marcus said, smiling slightly. Robert walked Marcus to the front door. Before Marcus left, Robert gripped his shoulder. I'm sorry I lost touch with you all these years. I'm sorry I didn't know what you were doing, what you were creating. I won't make that mistake again. You have your life, I have mine. We're different people now than we were in college. Maybe, Robert said. But tonight reminded me that the best parts of us don't change. You were always the most dedicated, most passionate person I knew. You still are. I'm proud to know you, Marcus. I'm proud to call you my friend. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then he went out into the cool autumn night and got into Robert's car. As the car drove through the dark streets toward Marcus's neighborhood, he looked out the window at the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered like stars. Somewhere in those buildings were his students, sleeping in small apartments like his own. Tomorrow they would wake up and go to school, and he would be there to teach them, like he always was. That was his real life. Not fancy drawing rooms and wealthy patrons, not offers of concerts and recordings, just him and his students and the piano in his classroom and the music they made together. But as the car drove on, Marcus found himself thinking about what Margaret Sullivan had said. What if his music could inspire others? What if the children who heard it could know that ordinary people could create extraordinary things? He thought about Vincent Hartley's words, the famous pianist who had everything but felt empty, who needed to remember why he loved music in the first place. Maybe Marcus did have something to share, not just with his students but with the wider world. Not fame, not fortune, but truth. The truth that art belongs to everyone, that beauty can be created anywhere, that sacrifice and struggle can produce something real and lasting. He didn't know what he would do, but for the first time in many years, Marcus Webb allowed himself to wonder if his small, quiet life might have the potential to touch more people than just the 30 children in his classroom. The car dropped Marcus off in front of his building. It was a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. The paint was peeling, the front steps were cracked, but the rent was cheap, and that was what mattered. Marcus climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. His legs were tired. His mind was full of the evening's events. He unlocked his door and went inside. The apartment was small. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and study. A tiny kitchen. A bathroom with old fixtures. But it was clean and it was his. And most importantly, it held his piano. The upright piano stood against one wall. It wasn't beautiful like Robert's grand piano. The wood was scratched. Some of the ivory was chipped. One of the legs wobbled slightly. But Marcus had saved for 3 years to buy it. He had carried it up the stairs himself with the help of 2 neighbors. He had tuned it himself, learning how from a library book. Marcus sat down at the piano bench. He was still wearing his brown suit, the one the wealthy guests had looked down on. He placed his hands on the familiar keys. These keys knew his fingers. They had felt his touch thousands of times. He began to play softly. Not the composition he had performed at Robert's house. Something new, something that had started forming in his mind during the car ride home. The music spoke of 2 worlds. The world of wealth and privilege he had just left. The world of struggle and simplicity where he lived. The music asked a question. Which world was real, or were they both real, just different? As Marcus played, he thought about Vincent Hartley, the famous pianist who had everything but felt empty, who had mastered technique but lost touch with truth. Vincent reminded Marcus of something important. Success didn't always mean fulfillment. Fame didn't always mean happiness. Marcus had made his choices consciously. He had chosen teaching over performing. He had chosen his students over concert halls. He had chosen a small, quiet life over recognition and wealth. And until tonight, he had been certain those choices were right. But now doubts crept in. What if Margaret Sullivan was right? What if he could do both? What if he could keep teaching and also share his music more widely? Would that be giving in to ego? Or would it be sharing a gift that could help others? Marcus stopped playing. He stood up and went to the small desk in the corner. He pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of notebooks, each one filled with handwritten musical scores, compositions he had written over the past 15 years. He pulled out one of the notebooks and opened it. The pages were covered with notes and measures and dynamic markings, all in his own handwriting, music that no one but him had ever heard. There were pieces about his mother, pieces about Mrs. Chen, pieces about his students, pieces about the factory where he had worked, pieces about loneliness and hope and perseverance. Each one was a small piece of truth captured in musical notation. What would happen to all this music when he died? Would it just be thrown away? Would these notebooks end up in a trash bin? All those truths lost forever? Marcus sat at his desk and put his head in his hands. He was tired. Not just physically tired from the evening. Tired in a deeper way. Tired of being invisible. Tired of having something to say but no one to say it to except himself. He had told himself for years that recognition didn't matter, that the work itself was enough, that teaching his students was reward enough. And most days that was true. Most days he believed it completely. But tonight had shown him something different. The people at Robert's house had been moved by his music. Really moved. Some had cried. Some had been changed. His music had communicated something they needed to hear. Was it selfish to want that to continue? Or was it selfish to keep his music hidden, to let it die with him? Marcus didn't know. He went to bed troubled, unable to sleep. His mind kept replaying the evening. The laughter when he sat at the piano, the silence when he began to play, the applause afterward, Vincent's face, Margaret's words, the possibilities he had never considered before. The next morning was Monday. Marcus woke early as always. He made simple breakfast of oatmeal and tea. He put on his teaching clothes, another old suit. He gathered his books and papers. Then he walked to Lincoln Elementary School just like he did every Monday morning. The school was a brick building in a poor neighborhood. The playground was cracked asphalt with a few pieces of old equipment. The building needed paint. The windows needed repair. But inside were 300 children who deserved the best education they could get, even if their school had no money. Marcus's classroom was on the second floor. It had 30 desks, a chalkboard, and the old piano with broken keys that the school had given him. On the walls were posters about famous composers and pictures his students had drawn of musical instruments. His students began arriving at 8 o'clock. They came in talking and laughing, their backpacks worn and their clothes often too small or too large. Many of them came from homes where English wasn't the first language. Many of them had parents who worked 2 or 3 jobs. These children faced challenges Marcus's wealthy hosts from the previous night could never imagine. "Good morning, Mr. Webb," Sarah said shyly as she took her seat. Sarah was 10 years old and painfully shy, but when she played piano she became confident and alive. "Good morning, Sarah," Marcus said warmly. More students filed in. Miguel, whose parents worked night shifts at a hospital. Amy, who lived with her grandmother because her mother was in rehab. David, who stuttered when he spoke but never stuttered when he sang. Each child carrying their own burdens, their own struggles. When all the students were seated, Marcus began the day's lesson. They were learning about rhythm and time signatures. He wrote examples on the board. He clapped patterns and had the students clap them back. He played simple pieces on the old piano to demonstrate. The students listened and learned. Some of them struggled. Some of them grasped the concepts quickly. Marcus was patient with all of them. He never made anyone feel stupid for not understanding. He never showed favoritism to the talented ones. During the lunch break, Marcus sat at his desk and ate the sandwich he had brought from home. He thought about Robert's mansion and the 7-course dinner on china plates. He thought about the contrast between that world and this one. Which was more important, teaching 30 children who might never become musicians, or composing music that could reach thousands? The answer seemed obvious when he looked at his students. These children needed him. They had no one else to teach them about music. If he left to pursue concerts and recordings, who would teach them? Would the school even replace him? Or would they just cancel the music program to save money? But then he thought about Vincent Hartley coming to play for his students. The famous pianist was coming here to this underfunded school because Marcus had asked him to. That would never have happened without last night's performance. What else might be possible if Marcus shared his music more widely? Maybe he could draw attention to schools like this one. Maybe he could inspire other teachers who were struggling. Maybe he could show people that art and beauty weren't just for the wealthy. After school ended, Marcus stayed late as he often did. He helped Miguel practice a piece he was struggling with. He listened to Sarah play a song she had learned on her own. He fixed the squeaky pedal on the classroom piano. When the last student left, Marcus sat alone at the old piano. He played quietly, thinking. The piano sounded thin compared to Robert's magnificent grand piano. But it was still a piano. It still made music. Beauty didn't require expensive instruments. It required honest hearts. 3 weeks passed. Marcus continued his normal routine, teaching during the day, composing at night. The evening at Robert's mansion began to feel like a dream. Maybe nothing would come of it. Maybe everyone would forget about the school teacher who played piano. But then Vincent Hartley showed up. True to his word, Vincent arrived at Lincoln Elementary School on a Tuesday afternoon. He came in a simple car, not a limousine. He wore ordinary clothes, not a tuxedo. He carried his own bag. The students stared at him with wide eyes when Marcus introduced him. "This is Mr. Hartley. He's a professional pianist. He's going to play for us today." Vincent sat at the old piano with the broken keys. He didn't complain about the instrument. He didn't compare it unfavorably to the concert grands he usually played. He just smiled at the children and began to play. He played pieces they could understand. Simple, beautiful melodies. Between pieces, he talked to them. He told them about learning piano as a boy. He told them about his first teacher. He told them it was okay to make mistakes, that mistakes were part of learning. The children were mesmerized. When Vincent finished, they clapped enthusiastically. Sarah raised her hand shyly. "Yes?" Vincent said kindly. "Can anyone learn to play like you?" Sarah asked. "Anyone who practices and doesn't give up," Vincent said. "I wasn't born knowing how to play. I had to learn, just like you're learning. And I still practice every day." After the children left, Vincent stayed to talk with Marcus. They sat at the old piano together. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said. "This meant a lot to them." "Thank you for inviting me," Vincent said. "I needed this. I needed to remember why music matters. These children, they listened with their whole hearts. When I play in concert halls, people are often thinking about other things, checking the program, worrying about what to say at intermission. But these children just listened. Really listened. They've never had a real concert before," Marcus said. "Most of them have never even been out of this neighborhood." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about our conversation, about learning to play with honesty. Will you still work with me?" "Of course," Marcus said. "Good, because I need to change. I need to find what you have, that connection to truth." They arranged to meet once a week. Vincent would come to Marcus's apartment in the evening. Marcus would play his compositions and they would talk about music, about truth, about what it meant to communicate something real rather than just performing notes on a page. The weeks turned into months. Vincent kept coming to Marcus's apartment. They talked for hours about music and life. Vincent gradually began to play differently. His performances became less perfect but more moving. His playing began to have depth it had lacked before. Meanwhile, word spread about Marcus. Margaret Sullivan had connections in the music world. She talked about the school teacher who composed extraordinary music. She arranged for a few music professors to visit Marcus. They listened to his compositions. They agreed with Margaret. This was something special. Richard Morton kept his word too. He arranged for Marcus's compositions to be recorded. Professional musicians played them in a small studio. Marcus supervised but didn't perform himself. He was too busy teaching. When the recordings were released, they didn't become bestsellers. Classical music rarely does. But they found an audience. Teachers bought them. Musicians listened to them. Music students studied them. People who had given up on their dreams heard them and felt inspired to try again. Marcus's life didn't change dramatically. He still taught at Lincoln Elementary School. He still lived in his small apartment. He still practiced on his upright piano with the scratched wood and chipped ivory. But now his music existed in the world. Now other people could hear what he had to say. Now his truth was available to anyone who wanted to listen. Vincent Hartley changed too. He began programming more diverse music in his concerts. He started commissioning new works from unknown composers. He spoke publicly about the importance of authenticity in music. He credited Marcus with helping him remember what really mattered. Robert Harrison stayed in touch with Marcus this time. They had dinner once a month, alternating between Robert's mansion and simple restaurants near Marcus's apartment. Their friendship deepened. Robert learned not to measure worth by money or status. Marcus learned that wealthy people could have struggles too, just different ones. Years passed. Marcus continued teaching. His students grew up and moved on. Some became musicians. Most didn't. But all of them carried with them the knowledge that beauty was possible, even in difficult circumstances. All of them knew that one ordinary-looking teacher had believed in them enough to share the gift of music. More of Marcus's compositions were recorded. Small concerts were arranged. Marcus attended a few but never performed himself. He was content to let others play his music. His job was creating and teaching. Performing was for others. One evening, 10 years after that night at Robert's mansion, Marcus sat at his old piano. He was 52 years old now. His hair was graying. His hands had a few age spots. But they still moved surely across the keys. He was composing a new piece. This one was about gratitude. About the unexpected ways life unfolds. About staying true to yourself while remaining open to possibilities. Marcus thought about the path his life had taken. If someone had told that 7-year-old boy in the cold church that this is where he would end up, would he have believed it? Probably not. Life had been harder than anyone should have to endure. But it had also been richer than he could have imagined. He had never become famous. He would never be written about in history books. He would never play for presidents or kings like Vincent Hartley had. But he had done something perhaps more important. He had stayed true to his art. He had helped hundreds of children. He had created music that spoke truth. He had lived with integrity. The new composition was coming together beautifully. Marcus played through what he had written so far. Yes, this was right. This captured what he wanted to say. There was a knock at his door. Marcus looked up, surprised. He wasn't expecting visitors. He went to the door and opened it. Sarah stood there. She was 20 years old now, a student at the music conservatory. The same conservatory Marcus had attended briefly all those years ago. Sarah had earned a full scholarship. She was studying piano performance. "Mr. Webb," Sarah said, smiling. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to tell you something." "Come in, Sarah," Marcus said. "You're never interrupting." Sarah came in and looked around the familiar small apartment. She had been here many times over the years. "I just found out," she said, her voice excited. "I won the regional piano competition. I'm going to perform at the Symphony Hall next month." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Sarah, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." "I wouldn't be here without you," Sarah said. "When I was that shy little girl in your class, you made me believe I could do this. You showed me that ordinary people could create extraordinary things. You were the first person who ever believed in me." Marcus hugged her. "You did this yourself, Sarah. You worked hard. You never gave up." "I want you to come to the concert," Sarah said, "please. It would mean everything to me." "I'll be there," Marcus promised. After Sarah left, Marcus sat back down at his piano. He looked at his notebooks full of compositions. He thought about Vincent Hartley, who had learned to play with his heart as well as his hands. He thought about his students, hundreds of them over the years, all carrying a little piece of what he had taught them. He thought about that evening at Robert's mansion when they had laughed at him, when they had expected him to embarrass himself. He hadn't been trying to prove anything to them. He had simply played what was true, and somehow that truth had rippled out into the world in ways he never expected. It had changed Vincent. It had inspired other teachers. It had helped children like Sarah believe in themselves. It had reminded people that art belonged to everyone, not just the wealthy and privileged. Marcus began to play his new composition again, the gratitude piece. He played softly, letting the music speak what words could not. Outside his window, the city was growing dark. Lights were coming on in windows all across the neighborhood. Behind each light was a life, a story, struggles and joys and dreams. Marcus's music floated out through his open window. In the apartment below, an old woman heard it and smiled. Across the hall, a young father rocking his crying baby felt the baby grow calm at the sound. On the street below, a teenager walking home from work stopped to listen for a moment before continuing on. They didn't know who was playing. They didn't know the story of the music teacher who had been laughed at in a mansion's drawing room. They didn't know about sacrifices and struggles and dreams deferred. They just knew that somewhere in their hard world, someone was creating beauty. And that was enough. That was everything. Marcus played on into the evening, alone but not lonely, unknown but not forgotten. His hands moved across the worn keys of his humble piano, creating truth one note at a time. And in that small apartment in that struggling neighborhood, something profound was happening, something that money couldn't buy and fame couldn't give. A life lived with purpose, art created with integrity, truth shared freely with anyone who would listen. That was success. That was victory. That was everything that really mattered.